A few notes about the talk. For the first 7 minutes, there are no images. Instead, a transcript of what Laffoley says is on the screen. For the rest of the talk, images of his artwork are shown and correspond to what he said in the original audio. For reference and synchronization, I used videos from YouTube channel Azelpup. Some of the paintings in the talk have been lost, so good quality images are not available, and these may appear blurred and distorted. Thank you to everyone who helped in this process, and additionally to Doug Walla at Kent Gallery for image permissions.
I'll start with a kind of introduction. I work basically in the visionary genre. This is, in a sense, it's not an art movement. It's existed all through history, and it can be done by individuals or groups, or just in different situations. People might not even know they're involved in. So what I thought I might try today is like take an overview of what I've done and like sort of like set the parameters as to what this is. What is the visionary genre? What is the subject matter? What type of forms occur in it? That you could then go and look at other people's work and see the same type of sensibility emerging. I've divided my slides basically in 4 sections. First section is information derived from the Greco-Roman world. Second would be Tibet, India. The third would be kind of medieval Western world. It's another modern world. Not that I'm, in a sense, like just lifting information from that and using it. It's transformed through my own mind. But that since the range of the visionary genre is not located, it's not like, say, English landscape painting that defined itself in the 19th century. This has implications for the past and the future. And in kind of brief definition of the genre is that it's like a reaction to revelation. Revelation normally or traditionally has been associated with various religions and has been utilized by religions in order to form the kind of the core of it. But if you consider it as a kind of phenomenon in itself, and make it, in a sense, methodological, begin to examine it as a species, that I think you'll find that there are 3 basic aspects to it. One that might be called the mystical, the second the prophetic, and the third the sacramental. These words, again, have reference to religions, but I'm not trying to relate it to any particular religion. I think that the nomenclature has yet to be defined by itself, and so therefore is connected mainly to its own natural origin, which comes from religion. I mean, many of the images I usually see religious imagery. I'm using it because of the forms that are created and the subject matter, but not in a sense connected directly to the religious content. I think that as people who are visionaries, this is not a superlative either. It's simply a descriptive form. There could be people in it who are, say, Dionysian, using kind of Nietzsche's dichotomy or taxion. And so you could be Apollonian or Dionysian. I think you'll find people in the show upstairs who represent both of those positions. The mystical aspect of visionary art is really the kind of subjective reaction or the imaginative reaction to revelation that goes on within an individual. The prophetic aspect is when somebody turns their mind outward, especially towards history, futurology, science fiction. In the Middle Ages, it was like the development of history. I guess in the 19th century, when history was beginning to form, that's when you got people like Hegel, who became the true visionaries of history, in a sense, developed the concept. The third, the sacramental, really deals with revelation in connection with nature. This is not, I'm not advocating a position of pantheism. I'm just talking now, say, like, physicists will talk about singularities of nature, positions or phenomena which are can almost be described as like dimensional portals. I consider dimensionality to be a hierarchy. Some people might consider to be simply alternative universes. So whatever those connections are, that would be like, in a sense, the sacramental. Like, say, a wheel rotating and the centroid of the wheel being still. Whereas, so that you've gone from a situation where energy is efficacious by motion to where energy is efficacious without motion. The pendulum swinging back and forth like this. The point at which it changes its direction, in a sense, is out of the system. That's like a singularity. Of course, like a black hole is the most dramatic form of singularity that physicists define. I think there are singularities in say the whole realm of temporality, like the small space and time between a cause and an effect is a type of singularity. So they're not just defined as something that's far away. They're all about us. Things like the Hindu notion of the eight chakras and acupuncture points are like a constellation of singularities throughout our body, which are used to organize all our cells into a kind of intercellular communication system. These are the things that are involved. And now I'd like to get right into the slides. Which is the button here. I love the question. First one.
Muy lista.
Okay. I think that we can start with, say, Egypt and move to Greece. One of the forms that occurs in the visionary genre is the auroral display, like a relationship to the sun. Of course, the Egyptians, sine qua non of the sun, like the pyramid itself, represents a ray, because it's actually built metaphysically from the top down, so that it forms like a ray, so that the proportioning system, the sacred geometry, is all connected to moving to this point and going back to an arc. Another consideration is like astral projection. The concern with death the Egyptians had was not, in a sense, a kind of necrophilia, but simply an idea that there were definite transitions between life and death, and that they use what I would consider natural singularities in their operations. So that I in this particular painting, I took on the task in Hoptep, the first architect that's in recorded history, for it to be alive today. What would he do? And so that I thought that since they're interested in the movement of the ka, that's that part of the Egyptian personality that we might call the astral body, that he'd be interested in an alternative modes of travel from the 19th century into the 20th century, when you get a great interest in the occult. You also have a transition from things like kite technology, fibro-tension technology, into more stylism. So I went back to that and said, if there could be a kite boat, this would provide a kind of an analog to the way the astral body works, with the kite as the astral body, the boat as the physical body, and the kite string as the etheric cord. the car symbol, the arms raised up like that, become a way of say, organizing the panel and actually in developing the kite itself so that it looks like sets of upraised arms. I'm going to go rather quickly and so that so you'll have time for questions. Okay. The next would be moving to the Greco-Roman world. I became very interested in Plato, and I would like to note that these paintings range over about 20 years of time, so that I'm not putting them in a chronological sequence. I'm putting them more in a kind of typology. I became interested in say, the Earth itself with ancient civilizations. I think many people have done this. You'll find that as the theme of Atlantis runs through many people's work that we can see the visionary. I actually did a project in which I made a model of Atlantis and proposed it as a way of studying the concept of utopia on the world level. I made it into a kind of a ship. It would be a mile by a mile, 0.618, so that it is related to the goal of proportion. And this would go around the Earth and pick up its own crew and begin to develop the concept of it as more than simply a literary. Many people believe that it's simply untrue, or that many people believe it's true, and yet their only contact with each other is like through the publishing system. A land-based form. This was done prior to people's interest in, let's say, postmodern architecture. Having worked for Kiesler, who worked for Adolf Loos, that I took the Temple of Zeus and the winning, not the winning, but the one that should have won the Chicago Tribune Tower competition in 1922, and put it on top of this, because Adolf Loos said that if this is not used at this point, someday some architect will use it for some purpose. And so I thought this was a good way of connecting into a soft point in architectural history. But then this would have been the land-based Utopia Study Center. It would be connected with the Atlantis project. This took place, I was going to have it placed behind the now defunct roller coaster at Revere Beach, the Cyclone, which can be turned into a walkway with many kinds of events that people could deal with. And another aspect of Plato is like his unwritten work. Just before he wrote the Laws, his last book, and his letters to private individuals, he wrote three, or was intended to write three dialogues. The Timaeus, which uses cosmology, Critias, in which Atlantis is described in kind of architectural specifications almost, and finally the unwritten Hermocrates. Part of his style was to leave something undone from one dialogue so that it create a problem to develop the next one. So I thought I'd finish or do the Hermocrates, and that you'll find that, say, in the visionary sensibility, like a world view or a meta-history becomes a prime consideration, especially in the kind of prophetic realm. I think reconstructing it, it would be constructed from parts of the other dialogues, which is essentially what he started doing. So he got the whole thing going together so that they all work as one thing. And so he postulated 3 ages. The first age would be like the golden age, in which things operated in copy. Young people got old, and that way. And then the second age was the result of the gods abdicating their position or their control. And so it was like running the movie backwards. And so this became a disaster. Food would come out of people's mouths and fall into the chicken and run away, just like running a movie backwards. So this was like one of the first references to doing that, which is now a popular thing in movies. The third age is when you have a condition of things running forwards and backwards. And this is where you get this reference to, say, the political styles of going from aristocracy to democracy, oligarchy, democracy, and finally to tyranny. And then the thing would begin over again. This is where, like, the fates come in. The fates represented as three women, the Lachesis, Clotho, and Atropos. The person who who carves the wool, the person who determines the length, and the person who cuts it off. So that here is when, like, a linear history is beginning to be formed, as well as the sense of cycles. And this is why I think we can legitimately connect Plato as like one of the prime influences to the visionary genre, which I think it did, in a sense, have a beginning, but the beginning is so long ago, and people might postulate that all our ideas about the length of the time that humans are on the earth keeps getting longer and longer. So he may simply have been programming information from a extremely distant past.
Paul Clement likes play.
Yes.
Mario.
Yeah. How's that? Yeah, sorry about that. This is like Plato's analogy of the sun, the line, and the cave, in which he actually describes how to himself, how the mystical experience operates. He used the line to give you a sense of the proportionate system. That this is the goal of proportion, and I've laid it out in that manner. The cave where the prisoners would have observed the shadows of figures behind them. One of them would be released, see at first what it was that was producing the shadows, then the fire that was the source, and then go out and finally see one of the forms, the so-called highest form of the good, which was represented by the sun, and then have to come back and be very inarticulate to the rest of the people that were in prison. Now, this is a perfect analog of how most people, when they have a first mystical experience, find it very difficult to verbalize or even provide any kind of way of presenting this form. So again, we have like things like a kind of chthonic inside of the earth, and finally using the sun as the notion of enlightenment. Plato further talked about how the human soul, when he was talking about the world soul, he also added a kind of curious codicil that the individual soul was made up of leftover materials when the universe was being created. So where star materials are, our soul will go back to a star, and the form of it would be the three great forms of existence, difference, and sameness, and which is exactly the way he described the universe being made. Now, these forms, for anything to exist, it must, of course, have the sense of existence, but it also must have the concept of sameness or difference, that you can't have any kind of language or discourse without there being a way to compare and contrast anything. So I think that's a kind of deep-seated notion about what human mentality is all about. This painting is like how I began to describe how you would take the Greek notion of utopia, which many people would now consider just simply a kind of evolutionary stage. So that I use like the logarithmic spiral, in which the right angle triangles, because like a lot of what Plato was doing was attempting to like deal with the concept of the atoms at the same time, because a lot of Greek philosophy was basically materialistic, and turned this materialism into something that was extremely abstract, so that the 30-60 triangle or the 45-degree triangle that architects use today actually represent the kinds of atoms that that Plato claimed that the universe was composed of. So that if you were to produce a situation where all social problems were resolved, that you would have to do this on such a scale that it was able to resolve three basic phenomena. The first phenomenon is just like say heading into pure being in terms of the mystical experience of an individual, which of course then advocates the social connection. The second would be that would be called utopia, spelled EU. The one that would continue what is unnecessary, I would call kakatopia, or the inverse, or dystopia, and that would be a vector of a spiral that would be, in a sense, going outward, because the spiral makes an infinite number of revolutions around its focus if it doesn't arrive. So there's something that is always moving away from it that has to be considered. That would be like collective alienation, where coming together created more and more problems. The third one, I would call kinetopia. This is like a kind of dissipation or just simply staying at the same level, which is a circle, because that's the third vector of spiral. This would be life lived totally, today we would say like a total titch life, where nothing changes. There's no change of consciousness up or down. It just remains the same. So these are conditions which would have to be overcome by the dynamism of the spiral going in. This is like I was talking before about Apollo and Dionysus, that many times the visionary genre gets associated with romantic art, especially when the analogies are made to pre-Raphaelites or the French symbolists in the 19th century, which are generally grouped with the whole notion of romanticism. I think it really isn't. I think that you'll find that the people who are Apollonian are systems builders, people today who would be very much interested in holistic systems. The Dionysians, on the other hand, would be those who considered the universe in terms of basic necessity rather than reason, and continue to, in a sense, figure out how to break systems down. So both of those impulses are necessary, and I think that the sense of balance that passes through the genre has to be maintained by genre. This is a homage to Dionysus. I built sculpture in a sense within the tradition of how it was originally done, which was first a mask on a tree, then a cape behind it, then eventually a body image, and then they starting to tell the myth of Dionysus as somebody who could transform himself and who was born of the Virgin settling on December 25th on the honor of Samos, began to work his way through the culture and became a kind of a sore point to her, who eventually had him killed, and he was then given birth again by Zeus on March 25th. So as a character in Greek mythology, he plays an extremely interesting part, because it's a kind of a hermaphrodite, which in a sense is able to, in one sense, combine both the Apollonian and the Dionysian impulses in one person. So many people, when they do their rendition of it, find they move towards one or the other. I try to maintain a balance in this, because I think that I agree with Plato that necessity, of course, is is prior to reason. Heraclitus, one of the Physiocrats, was a great influence on Plato, and especially to move away from the notion of material itself. And his idea about the universe was that it was based on fire. This is kind of a Ouroboros concept, which means that it could change into anything and come back on itself. The concept of the logos, which people like Alice Bailey take up in the 19th century and Madame Blavatsky, is really defined for Heraclitus. It's like it's the universe of the subconscious. It's like he believed that when everyone was conscious, that they were real. When they were dreaming, they were unreal. They were disconnected. That the only unity is possible in consciousness. So we would call that like people moving into a trans consciousness or a superconscious. This one is like part of my own influence. I began to be interested in labyrinths, and so I was fooling around, and one day I thought about designing a pinball museum with the concept, because of the sense of the kind of labyrinthine movement towards a particular pinball machine. Then the kind of enclosure that would be at the top, of where everything was eliminated from the process of the game, and then suddenly after you're through, you leave but there is a slight backward glance at the underneath would be all of the from the 19th century, like from Bagatelle on up to any kind of display and computer games that would go on today would be logged and presented as part of the museum. This would be holographically hooked up around the world, and you would see champion players on your own video stream as to how they actually look. This one is it is also, along with this, I think I'm trying to inject a sense of humor into the situation. That this, of course, is like an extremely interesting part of the visionary genre. People think of it as some kind of like it isn't there. I think it's very much there, and it's the connection between Apollo and Dionysus. I think it's what Prometheus is all about. This one, the Athenopolis, the Singularity City, is an attempt to provide through structured singularities, through an analog between my dimensional system and Plato's theory of the line, where there are four types of knowledge, as to how you have a group of people actually connect to and understand the form of utopia. And this would involve 64 people, 32 from the present, 16 from the past, and 16 from the future. And that I'm using, like, I've invented what I call a time machine, which is a way to amplify pre- and retrocognition. And that's involved in what this is. But I'll explain that. Okay, from Tibet in India, in terms of my own influences, that I began a long time ago painting mandalas. And I think, as many people would agree, that the mandala structure is like the primary kind of form that goes through the visionary genre. Take the work of Blake. Many of his paintings, the reason for the strength is the kind of centering that you find. He may be using imagery that appears to the 18th century, but it's simply the organization. So that something that this looks a lot like a Tibetan mandala, because I was looking at a lot of them. So that the particularized formulation is simply due to the content of that culture that developed. But I think that you can, in the one sense, abstract the mandalic structure and begin to use it in other